Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com. Face off with Firefly Publishing for another drop into the fascinating world of pro hockey history with Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. Following his bestseller, hockey historian and writer Eric Zwig opens the doors to the Pro Hockey Hall of Fame, revealing a treasure of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave the most devoted puckhead astounded. Just to name drop a few of the players he's included in this book are Wayne Gretzky, Jaromir Jagr, and Bobby Hull. Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 is a must-read for pro hockey fans who crave more than just scores and statistics. Mr. Zwig invites you to uncover the true stories that have shaped the sport, ensuring that you will never look at the game of hockey the same way again. So skate on over to Amazon.com, Target, and Walmart to get your copy now.
Pleased to have another episode of the Professional Football Researchers Association podcast here as part of the Sports History Network, and a special guest today that has a relationship to our last podcast guest in Joe Righetti, and that is his brother-in-law in Don Hermann, who is joining us and had more than just a cup of coffee in the NFL, had a I guess I could say celebrated time of football success at the highest level, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, but stories like this are perfect for us here on the PFRA Podcast. And Don Hermann, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of the pod.
It's a pleasure to be here, John. And just been a long time since I've talked to someone about football. Go ahead.
No, I get it. And, I know that oftentimes, for a lot of folks, their football life is their life. And I guess it sounds like for you, Don, that, it was a big part of your life. But since you retired or left in 1977, it sounds like you've kind of taken a deep breath and gotten away from the game. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say for the most part. To me, my family has always been the most important part of it. I always wanted to make sure that I had a job where I was able to always be a part of the family. I never wanted to be in the corporate world because I know they always drag you away with something. But so when I left football, I started into a business of building, which I kind of, I could control a lot of what I did on my own.
Sure. And when your football life began, when was that? When did you know? Good sized guy, 6'2", 205. I'm sure at some point someone in a hall somewhere said, "Hey, Don, you look pretty good with a uniform on and maybe catching the pigskin running down the field." At what point was that someone approached you and said, "Hey, maybe you should try out the game of football"?
Try out for the NFL football, or just try out for football, you mean?
Do you just try out for football in general? What point was that in your life that someone said you should start playing?
I grew up in the town of Linden, New Jersey, until I was 13 years old. And Linden was a great place because it had parks every couple of blocks. And, of course, there were a lot of kids around and stuff, so you could always find a game somewhere of some sort, whether, baseball, basketball, football, or something. And I was always attracted to the football side of it. And a lot of times I played with older kids. and it was something. I don't know how to explain. I've got a friend that has a dog, and he has two dogs. One dog he will throw the ball to constantly, and that dog will go get that ball and bring it back. And the other dog couldn't care less. I was kind of like the first dog when I had the football. As long as I could carry the football or catch the football, it just did something in me that made it enjoyable. And so I like I said, I played in a lot of Little League games there. And then when we moved to Chatham, New Jersey, there was an organized Little League, and I joined that right away and played in that league, and then from there to high school and stuff.
Did it kind of come easy to you?
I thought the game was fairly easy. I had a number of injuries. My first day, my first practice in high school, I separated my shoulder as a sophomore. And so I missed most of that year until the last 3 games. And injuries were always a part of it. And even in high school, my senior year, I missed like 3.5 games with the injuries, two different injuries. So the game itself was fun, but I was always missing stuff, with the injuries and stuff. But that never deterred me.
Don, once you got into high school, you then went on to, I believe, Waynesburg College, correct?
Yes.
And I know that while you were there, your team was NAIA national champions in, I believe, 1966.
Yes.
Yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I just walked on at Waynesburg, and I wasn't recruited anywhere really. So from high school, like I said, I missed a good portion of my senior year. So when I walked out on Waynesburg, one of the things I found out is that they were a pretty talented team out here. I thought that the guys hit pretty hard, and they had a quarterback. My freshman year, the senior quarterback actually went to the Redskins. I think Joe probably told you that was Harry Theophilides. So we always had a good quarterback there at Waynesburg, and it was something that, for me, the way I would describe it, the Lord has a leading in my life. I've known that for a long time, and He put me in a place where I could develop. I wanted to go to a big school. I tried to transfer to Purdue. I tried to go to Rutgers and different places. And one of the things I found out after I left is I needed to develop. I grew about 1.5 inches, put on about 20 pounds, and had a chance to play at a level that I could compete at. And every year I got a little better, and I think that was a big part of it, just being in the right place at the right time.
Were you, at that time, were you thinking NFL, or was that not even on your radar?
I always thought about the NFL. I don't know why. That was always a goal of mine to get there. And I think one of the biggest things that happened to me, and this can happen to a lot of players, after practice one day, and I believe it was in the spring, the head coach, Carl DePasqua, came into the locker room, and I'm sitting on the bench getting changed, taking my pads off, and I don't have a shirt on or anything like that. I'm just sitting half dressed, and he sits down next to me, and he says to me, you can be better. You can take your game to another level. And that was the first time anyone had ever said that to me, and it made a real impression on me because we really respected Carl. I mean, he was a type of coach, didn't yell, didn't scream, just had a real nice way about him of getting you to motivate you. And so when he sat down and did that to me, it made a big impression in my life.
You obviously experienced that success at the NAIA level, and you said you always had your eyes on the NFL, and I guess it's interesting to me because now, Waynesburg is a Division III college, and a lot of times those guys are looked at as being a level short of being NFL players. What do you think made it different back in 1969 that allowed guys from that level to make such a nice push towards the NFL? Because you were there, Rigetti was there, your quarterback was there. Why was it that guys at your level were able to find their way to a roster in the NFL, Don?
And we also had another fellow, Dave Smith, who played 2 years with us and then transferred to Indiana and wound up going to the Steelers. The competition, I thought, was very good. I thought we had a really good team. And some of the guys, not only Joe and I, but I thought there were a couple other guys that could have moved on and played, maybe not on the NFL level, but they wound up playing on teams like the Bridgeport Jets, in the Continental League, in the Atlantic Coast League. So we had a lot of good players. And I think just playing at that level gave you a little bit of confidence. Now, when I jumped to the next level, it was a big difference, more than you think when you get there, because the quality of play is so increased on that. But the coaches gave us good confidence. Winning the championship probably was a big deal for us, thinking that we could play with some other talented teams. I think Joe told you that in the semifinal game when we played New Mexico Highlands, who was really a pretty good team, and had Carl Garrett, who wound up being Rookie of the Year 2 years later. So it was a good level. I thought it was a good level of competition.
So, Don, in 1969, you're drafted by the Giants. And you grew up in Jersey. Before you were drafted by the Giants, were you a Giants fan?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Watching Moyer and Del Schaffner, Erich Barnes, and everybody like that, for Frank Gifford and everybody. Yeah. Yeah, when you could watch them, because if they played home, you couldn't watch them at that time. So I would listen to Marty Glickman on the radio. And away games were blacked out until they eventually they did it when they had a sellout crowd, I guess. Then they opened it to the viewing public.
Yeah, I grew up in the '60s myself, and I had that same experience living in Northeast Ohio and following the Browns, because I remember when the Browns were in the '64 championship game, it was actually blacked out, and we had to watch it the next day. So yeah, it was a different world back then. So,
yeah.
You talk about the fact you came from Waynesburg, and you actually had immediate success when you got to the NFL. I mean, your first game was probably something that most NFL players would dream about. Can you tell us about your first game against the Vikings and what happened, so I don't spoil the story for our audience?
The Vikings that year were the team that wound up going to the Super Bowl. And, of course, we had Tarkenton, who we had traded for him a couple of years before I got there. And so opening day was a big rivalry, I guess, at that time. I had a pretty good preseason. I had caught a couple touchdowns in the preseason, and Alex Webster, who took over as head coach because they fired Allie Sherman at the end of the preseason, did not start me opening game. He thought I would be coming from a small school. He thought I'd be a little too nervous and wouldn't be ready. But as the game went along, I think I got in second quarter or something like that. And we were losing. Vikings were ahead of us. And I wound up catching 2 touchdowns from Tarkenton. One on a corner route, and then the last one was the one that tied the game on a slant. And then we kicked the extra point to win that game. But it was a big day for me. I wound up with the New York Times in the locker room, taking a picture of me with Mr. Mara and everything. And it was just an exciting way to start the season, especially coming from a small school,
Yeah, I mean, you jump and I was just looking at this. Finding the end zone was not really like a lost thing for you. I mean, you had an art of finding the end zone in college. Did I read that you scored 7 touchdowns in a game against Lock Haven? Is that correct, Don?
Yeah, that was my final game senior year, and the coach said, "We'll get you drafted." So I think I caught 18 balls that day for 300 and some yards and 7 touchdowns. And it was just It was just a fun day. I remember telling the quarterback we made up one play in the huddle on our own, right off the bat. We just said we have never run it. We said let's run post and go. So John Hunty was our quarterback, and we threw this post and go for 60 to open the game, and from there on it was just snowballed.
It's
so it was a huge day.
It's interesting you say that because I just did a podcast about Dub Jones, who played with the Browns and passed away this year. And apparently,
who was that?
Dub Jones. He played for the
Doug
Browns.
Jones.
Yeah, and he scored 6 touchdowns in a game, which tied the record. And the story goes that Otto Graham changed the play in the huddle so that Jones could get the touchdown. And he said Paul Brown never said anything to me because Paul Brown basically controlled the offense. He said because it was a success because they scored the touchdown. I don't think he was sure what Paul Brown might have said to him if they hadn't scored the touchdown, but it worked out. Yeah, you played with Tarkington, and I have to ask this question. Tarkington obviously was known as a scrambler. Did that mean that you had to be more aware of where you were at on the field because you never knew, where he was going to end up as he was scrambling? Did you have to break routes and find open spots and do things because he was all over the place?
Yeah, you did. But just to go back, like you said, change the play. You could bring a play into the huddle to Tarkington, and he would say, "Get that out of here! I got something going." But if Fran dropped back and the pattern that he wanted to throw broke down, you had to get into a scrambling route that he was going in. In other words, if he drops back and he gets pressured and rolls out to his left, well now, and I'm on the right side running something, well I've got to break across the field and get into a pattern where he can find somebody coming across the field. And all the receivers had to do that to just get open because he'd be looking while he was on the run to throw the ball that way. So I watch guys today where a guy will scramble and they'll stay in the spot where they were. Well, Fran, you had to move across the field and get in that throwing pattern.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too because John, one of the other things that John does is that he covers the Browns. And last week there was a play with Mahomes where Mahomes had to scramble all over the place, and he kept looking and looking and looking. And what was different is that his receivers kept moving, and finally one guy came open. One guy came open in the middle of the end zone, and Mahomes saw him and he hit him for the touchdown. But you're right. You in those kind of situations because a lot of the modern day quarterbacks, move around even more than, back in the day. I think that's why Tarkington had the reputation because he was one of the few that did that back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what happens on the defensive coverage is it breaks down. They've got a assigned area where they usually have to be, if they got coverage 1, coverage 2 or something like that. And once that breaks down, it's kind of a free-for-all out there. You just find an open spot. That's the main thing. Even running a pattern, the idea is to find the open spot. But so like I said, you just get yourself into a throwing lane where he could see you and get rid of the ball. Because he was always looking, Fran. He scrambled, but he was always looking to throw the ball.
Don Hermann is our guest, former New York Giant, former New Orleans Saint, played his college ball at Waynesburg, and obviously we're excited to have him here on the podcast if you're listening wherever you may be finding this. Don, it always strikes me whenever we talk to different players when, they mention plays or things like that. It seems like you were a very studious player. Am I correct in saying that? It seems like you maybe spent a lot of time and did playing with Fran make you spend more time in the film room because you had to anticipate him more than other quarterbacks?
No, I don't think so. In New York, the coaching staff that we have there, Ali Sherman got fired, and Alex Webster took over. And Alex really hadn't been a coach, I think, for like a year or something. He really wasn't prepared to be the head coach of the team. But he was a popular guy, and Mr. Mara wanted to put him in. So the coaches that we had basically just gave you patterns to run. I mean, they helped you a little bit to learn something about it, but it wasn't like when I went to New Orleans with Sam Ratigliano. Sam Ratigliano really taught you a lot about how to run patterns and how to get open down there, because the first thing he would tell you is, we would run these films and watch the films, and he would say, at the snap of the ball, he'd say, "What's the coverage?" You had to know what the coverage was, whether they were going to roll you, whether they were going to double you at the snap of the ball. You had to know that. In New York, they didn't teach you that. They just basically taught you the patterns that they wanted you to run. So with Fran, he would tell you, Fran would tell you stuff, what to do, how to get open. Here's an incident we had. We were playing the Dallas Cowboys, and Herb Adderley is the cornerback. And I run down and I run a square out, and Herb steps in front of me, catches the ball in his hands over his head, and I reach up and I take the ball out of his hands. And I wound up with the catch on it. I go back to huddle. Tarkenton says to me, "Run the same pattern, he'll be 10 yards off of you." We run the same pattern, he's 10 yards off of me. And that's the kind of thing that you knew from, you learned from Fran. But he could tell you stuff right in the game, what to do. And that was the great thing about him. He's the smartest guy. He was the smartest one I ever played with.
Yeah, I think.
And I played with a couple. I played with Norman, and I played with Norm Snead, and I played with Archie, and I played with Bobby Douglas, Bobby Scott. But he was by far the smartest quarterback.
Yeah, I think you kind of take me to my next question. But I mean, anytime we talk to a guy that is a Hall of Famer or played with a Hall of Famer, I always ask what made that guy a Hall of Famer, and it sounds to me like Fran was just like a step ahead of everybody. Like he just was able to. Yeah,
he really was.
And tell me about that. What was that like playing with a guy like that? Did that rub off on you? Did that rub off on the other guys? How did that affect the huddle when you guys were on offense?
Well, I remember Junior Coffey in a locker room one time saying to me, he said, "We can only go as far as that guy," meaning Fran, he said, "can take us." And that was the thing about Fran. He just knew what other teams were doing, and he would make it that made it that much easier for you because he knew what he wanted to call, and where he wanted to throw the ball. So, it was great to play with him.
You mentioned Sam Rutigliano, and obviously for my father and I here, I've grown up a Browns fan.
In Cleveland, sure.
Yeah, he grew up a Browns fan. I mean, we still unfortunately are Browns fans. But Coach Sam, he was so beloved here because of his attitude and his just outgoing personality. Everybody fell in love with him during the Cardiac Kids years here. Could you tell from when you first met him that he was bound to be a head coach and bound to have success? Was he that type of guy, Don?
I think he was. He was from Brooklyn, and everybody that I met from Brooklyn who was in the coaching staff knew how to handle people. We had incidents in the locker room where guys would say something, watching films, they would say something, and Sam knew exactly when to. He stopped the film one time and yelled at this guy in the locker room, in the film room, and he knew exactly when to do that, and he also knew when to encourage you, pat you on the back, and the other thing is he loved the players. He really did, and and that just came across. You know what I mean? He'd run a film sometime, and somebody would do something dirty on the film. He said, "Oh, I was out there with you guys." He said, "I would be on that guy's back. I would tell." You knew he had your back all the time. He's just that kind of a guy. He really was a great man.
Well, and I see here in your numbers that you're playing for the Giants. You're with them, and you have your first 5 years of moderate to high level of success, and then you have a couple of down years. And obviously, I'm sure injuries played a role in that and different things, but then you go to New Orleans in the second year, you have a career year in terms of yardage and in terms of some of the other things you did. Did Sam have a direct impact on that?
I think he did. The way he taught us how to read those defenses right off the bat. He just he had a way about teaching you. He was a great teacher like that. I thought. And so it really helped you on the field.
When you were in New Orleans, Hank Stram was your head coach for a couple of years, and this was towards the end of Stram's coaching career before he moved into broadcasting. What was it like? You talked about Sam Martigliano. What was it like playing for Hank Stram?
Terrific. I felt like it was the first time that I had a head coach. I had Alex for 5 years. Like I said, Alex, he really wasn't in a position to be a head coach, but they kept him there. And between Joe Walton and Fran, they pretty much ran what we were doing on the offense all the time. So when I went down there, you asked me, it was just a different atmosphere with them. Hank was the type of guy who would do anything for the players, anything. He had a statement. They said Meekum gave him an open checking account, and he spent it by the time we got out of training camp. We would stay at the best hotels, and it really hurt him that we didn't win there. Yeah. Because he was a winning guy, and he had a great staff around him, and we were missing some parts that we needed, to really be a good team. Because he had two terrific running backs in Muncie and Galbraith, but some of the other parts defensively and even on the offensive line and stuff, we were missing some parts that really could have helped us. But he would do. He was so different, from the atmosphere that I had in New York. Just the way he dressed. His father was a tailor, right? So he would bring two suits to the game, one that he would wear, and then he would change and wear a suit to go out on the sidelines during the game and everything. And he was just a guy that you looked up to and respected. And if you needed something, he was right there to give it. I needed a car in New Orleans one time. And in New York, I used to get a car all the time. One of the dealers would give it to me. So my wife was down, and I went in and saw him, and I said, Coach, I need to get a car from somebody. He said, hold on. And the next day he calls me and he goes, Donnie, go see this guy. And the guy gave me a car, to work on. But that's the way he was. He would help you in anything that you needed because he wanted to get the job done,
You, you were in New Orleans. You also mentioned that, you played with a number of name quarterbacks, and obviously we've talked about Fran. You played with Archie Manning. Well, Archie Manning was always one of those guys. I know he sometimes wasn't as celebrated as his sons, but people always felt that he was a better quarterback sometimes than he got credit for. What were your feelings about playing with Archie?
I thought Archie was a good quarterback. I didn't think he was as good as Fran, or maybe even the Norman Snead, because Norman was a pretty accurate thrower, and we got Norman at the end of his career, but I had a pretty good year with Norman. Archie, the one thing about Archie is I go down there and I played 3 games. I had been cut by the Giants. I played 3 games with Archie. The next year, during the off season, they operated on Archie's shoulder, and they tied his tendon too tight. So he comes to camp, and he can't really throw. They tell, do this exercise, it'll raise your arm and everything. So it never loosened up. So he wound up getting surgery again at the start of that season. So he missed that whole year. The next year he comes back, and when you miss a year, you're not going to be as sharp as you are when you play all the time. So he had missed the whole year, and I thought that he struggled a little bit that next year, as a quarterback. The following year, I thought he was a little bit better,
Yeah.
He was a much better runner than his 2 sons were. That's no question about that. I mean, But like I said, and the other thing about Archie was he got sacked 50 times a year,
Right. Yeah.
and he was somewhat of a scrambler, but that's why I said the offensive line, we were just missing some parts and stuff that they needed, You win with those guys up front, no matter what anybody tells you. When you got those guys up front give you time to throw the ball. All the quarterbacks look good. Look at Darno, who went from the Jets to Minnesota, what a difference what a difference it makes when he stands behind a good offensive line, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean the game can really be boiled down to a pretty simple idea right there that I think a lot of people get lost looking at, right?
Yeah. Tarkenton, his ability to scramble helped him a lot, because he didn't have maybe a great line, but
yeah. For you, I was reading that kind of after your career and even during your career, and you mentioned this, but faith seemed to have played a big role in your life and continue to play a big role in your life. Tell us a little bit about that, Don, where faith came into it for you and why it was and is so important to you.
I'm sorry, I missed why what?
Faith.
Oh, faith in my life?
Yeah.
That's where it all starts. I mean, I just know what the Lord's, how do I put this? There's a thing called restraining grace that the Holy Spirit gives to people, and that is sometimes you want to make a decision that's a bad decision when you're a believer, and it stops you from doing that. One of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to transfer out of Waynesburg to go to Purdue, and I thought I could play at that level. I had a friend out there who was playing, and he said, yeah, you can play out here. So if I'd have done that, that would have been the biggest mistake in my life, because my wife was at college there, and I wound up marrying her, and we knew each other from high school too. But I needed, like I told you earlier, I needed time to develop, and that's what the Lord said to me. Now we're going to close that door, and you're going to stay here, and you're going to learn how to do what I want you to do. And when I look back at my life, there's a lot of times when He's done that. And so I try to teach that to my family. And that was taught to me as a young man, and just that belief that you have really sustains you in a lot of things. And people might not know this, but there's a chapel service every week in the NFL before the games, and each team has a chapel leader. And what you do is the fellow who set it up, when you go to a city or even in your own city, he will contact someone who's going to speak to you that day. And just a number of the players will come, and it's a church service before we go to the stadium.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. Where did that? Do you know where that originated, Don? Was that something that was in right when you came to the league, or had that been around a while?
It was in when I came to the league, and in New Orleans, Sam Rutigliano was a big part of it. Sam had given, he gave his testimony, and he used to join with us, but he always made reference to it all the time, about his faith and what he was doing, and he was a big part of it in New Orleans, yeah. But the league always had it, and we met some great people around when we would go around the U.S. And people would come and speak to us,
Since we're talking about faith and family, I have to ask, because you told me the story when I first contacted you about coming on the podcast. Tell me about the story and your being brother-in-laws with Joe Righetti.
Well, Joe and I, we had played, and we didn't talk a whole lot because he was on defense and I was on offense. But we got to know each other once we got drafted a lot. Once we got drafted, then we started to spend some time together, And when I got married, Joe knew my wife too, because we were all in college together. So I invited him to come out, and he comes out to my wedding, and he meets my sister. And my sister and my brothers and Joe, my brothers all knew Joe because they were at college too. And they go over to New York or something. We went on a honeymoon, and they go over to New York. And so Joe got to know her a little bit. And then the next season, from my understanding, was Cleveland goes to Miami to play an exhibition game, and he contacted my sister, who was living in Miami with my grandparents at that time, going to school at FAU. And so they met down there a little bit, and I guess it just flourished from there, and then eventually got married. They got married down there in Miami.
Wow.
Small world.
In the off season,
Yeah. I have one last question, and then I'll turn it over to Jon. You you played with the and you mentioned Mr. Mayer. You played for the Mayors. They're sort of obviously amongst the most well-known ownership family probably in NFL. What was it like playing for the Mayors?
It was good. It was a good situation playing there. His family was always involved in everything. The boys who run it now were just young then at the time. But he was always on the sideline, Mr. Mara, always watching, It was just tough to deal with as far as contracts, I'll tell you that. It was a big it was a big difference between New York and New Orleans. But he would be on the sideline all the time, watching the games, watching practice, because he was very interested in what was going on,
Yeah, I want to put that in perspective because I saw an article about you that I found in a local New Jersey paper, and it said your rookie contract was for the grand total of $18,000.
Correct.
Just to show the difference between 1969 and 2024. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think part of that was bonus money, as I recall.
Right. I got $14,000 for a salary. Jim Lee Howell came out from New York to sign me. I guess he had retired as coach and was working for the Giants front office at that point. So he comes out to Waynesburg, and I'm looking at this guy. He's 6'7". I said, "Oh my golly, this is the coach." Anyway, he sits down with my coach, and we do a contract. And my coach said, "Yeah, that's fair. This is what you can do." Darrell Lewis was my coach at that time, and he said, "Yeah, this is fair." So they gave me $14,000, $2,500 signing bonus, $1,500 if I made the team by the first game. Now, like I told you before, there was a thing called the Atlantic Coast League, and they were subsidized by the NFL. Okay, so the Long Island Bulls had a team, and the Giants were going to move me down to the Long Island Bulls to save the $1,500. But I had such a good preseason that they wound up keeping me on the team for that time. Now, the next year, I go back, and I sat down with I forget who it was now, because I talked to somebody different every year. I said, okay, I got 18 last year, and I wound up starting this year. So he said, no, wait a minute. He said, you didn't get 18. He said, you got 14. We don't count the bonus money. I said, oh, okay. I never had an agent or anything, and I'm not a very good negotiator. So he said, we'll give you 20 and 1,500 if you're in the top 22 played. So I was. So then the following year, I come back and I said, I made 20 last year. And he goes, whoa, wait a minute. You made 21.5. I said, I thought you didn't count bonuses. He goes, Don, it all comes out of the same pocket. So they knew how to negotiate. I didn't. And so I always wound up settling for whatever they gave me, basically, And that's the way but then when I went to New Orleans, see, that's why I said they paid me right away. I thought they paid well right away, right off the bat, and I had been cut, and yet they still paid me well.
Wow. Don,
it was just it was a different organization,
Don Hermann is our guest, former Saint, former Giant, played college ball at Waynesburg, and had a nice career in the NFL for 8 years by my count, and maybe 9, I think it is. And
yeah, I think I got 9 altogether, yeah.
Yeah, you did. Don, last question I want to ask you, and I think I asked your brother-in-law this, and I want to ask you this too, but what do you think of the NFL today? What strikes you about the NFL today? What maybe disappoints you about the NFL today? What makes you happy about the NFL today? I don't know how much you pay attention to it, but I'm always curious to hear ex-players' thoughts about the NFL.
I think, it develops. I think it gets better all the time as far as the athleticism of the league. Guys are maybe faster. As far as receivers, they're still about the same size as when we played. There's a lot of small receivers in the league, and the defensive backs are basically the same size too. That hasn't changed. The linemen are much bigger. The linemen are all much bigger on the league. But some of the catches they make are terrific, and things like that. One of the negatives, so it would be fun to play in that league with all the new offenses, the slots, the motion, and all of that kind of stuff. Because it really, you watch Kansas City, and they're so creative. They'll try anything. They get anything to get people going in motion, and so now the league starts to follow some of that. The difference, one of the biggest things that negatives is the fact that there's so many penalties, and that's because if they haven't changed the rules, they certainly don't call them. For instance, our linemen, when we play, we're not allowed to extend their hands and grab guys like that. The first move they make today is they grab the guy's shoulder pad, both offensively, defensively, and even in the secondary. So there's so many more holding calls, way more than when we played. Way more than when we played. And that's the biggest change, I think, in the league today. But as far as things like the kicking game, where guys with the soccer-style kickers, they can kick so much further. I go watch high school games, and I watch the kids kick in high school games, and I can't believe how well they kick. That soccer-style kicker has changed everything. I'm not a big fan of the new kickoff rule, but
yeah, I don't really like it either. Do you wish you were playing?
I guess Trump doesn't like it either because he called Goodell about it.
Do you wish you were playing? Do you wish you were playing in the league today?
Every day. I go watch. I was watching my grandsons play in Little League, and the guy stands next to me. He says, "Do you wish you were out there?" I said, "Yeah, I do." It's just something about it that you just want to always do. And I like I said about that dog chasing that ball, I would just chase it. I don't know why.
Well, Don, we appreciate the time. We really enjoyed the discussion, and you're welcome back on the podcast anytime. So thanks for joining George and I, and thanks for being part of the discussion.
It's always great when somebody remembers, and it's a real thrill to me, to be able to do something like this. So I appreciate the fact that you called and remembered.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even write an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.